Hi, I'd like to welcome Jack Bales to the August 19th Bud Metheny chapter meeting. Jack is a SABR member of our Maryland and DC chapter, and he resides in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Jack had a book published in June of 2021. The title of the book, The Chicago Cubs Shot for Love, A Showgirl's Crime of Passion and the 1932 World Series. So I'm very grateful for Jack joining us tonight and talk about his book. And I can't think of anything better than combining baseball, passion, and showgirls. So I'm
That's
sure
exactly right.
Great conversation. So with that, Jack, I'll let you share your screen and we'll take off.
And let me see. Here it is right here. This is what I want. And there we go. And let me get this taken care of. And there we go. I'm all set now. Okay. Thanks very much for you all having me here. I'm really looking forward to this, and you're not going to be bored. It's just a marvelous topic. It's a sensational moment in the history of baseball. And I like to think it's both a fascinating baseball story and also really a neat true crime story of intrigue, true crime intrigue as well. And it's topped off by dozens of never before photographs too. So first of all, let me start out with September 20th, 1932. And the Cubs had just clinched the National League pennant with a record of 90 wins and 64 losses. And there were 4 games in front of the second place Pittsburgh Pirates. Now, the Chicago Daily Tribune was rather stunned by this accomplishment, as the Cubs had a lot to deal with during the course of the season and quite a few major setbacks. Early on, it was thought that there was little pitching besides Charlie Root and Pat Malone. And that's where we talk up here in the Tribune, the Cubs defy experts. They all thought the Cubs had no pitching, but they also had Lon Warnke, and he had been a rookie in 1931, but it hit 238. He had a 2.38 ERA in 1932. And team president William Veeck wondered about the outfield, as Hack Wilson had been traded, but Johnny Moore stepped up and he hit 308 that year. The Tribune reported that, quote, "Never before was a team beset with more irritating experiences apart from the plane of baseball." And besides this hard luck, these irritating experiences included the obvious bad blood between Rogers Hornsby and William Veeck, the shooting of Chicago Cubs shortstop Billy Jurgis by his former girlfriend, and also the Chicago Daily Tribune had created an uproar with its unfounded charges of horse race gambling among the players. The Sporting News pointed out that the Cubs season, as you can see here, gave the Cubs a succession of varied thrills, and tops on the list of both the Tribune and the Sporting News, as I said, was the July 6th shooting of their star shortstop in, as the Sporting News put it over here, an episode of unrequited love. Now, the sensational shooting of a popular baseball player by his former lover, Violet Popovich, immediately captivated the public's attention, and everyone all over Chicago clamored to know what exactly went on in Billy Jurgis's hotel room in the Chicago's hotel, the Hotel Carlos. Just a few hours after reporters heard the news, the Daily News and the Daily Illustrated Times was on the streets with banner headlines, as you can see here. And by the way, see the Daily Illustrated Times article. The entire headline, with the second part in smaller type not shown, reads, "Bill Jurgis shot by spurned cabaret girl." And the Associated Press carried the news across the country, reporting that, quote, "A woman scorned almost took the life of Bill Jurgis, star shortstop of the Chicago National Baseball League." Okay, now you might be wondering, how did I come across this story? So I grew up outside Chicago in Aurora, Illinois, and that's me there in the Cubs shirt. And I've enjoyed researching and writing for many years. And after finishing several books about literary figures, mostly for academic publishers, I wanted something entirely different to work on. And after learning that little had been written about the early Cubs, the early 19th century Cubs, before they were called the Cubs, I immersed myself in newspaper articles, memoirs, archival records, lots of archival records, and other original sources to tell this story. And while working on my Cubs book, I'd read about the shooting incident and a few Cubs histories, but the authors provided little, except a few cursory comments here and there. And since I felt that the story made the Cubs season particularly dramatic, I set out to find out what I could on this dramatic confrontation in room 509 of the Hotel Carlos, Billy Jurgis's hotel room. Now, information about Billy's life, was really pretty easy to find. But what about Violet's background? What about her childhood? What about her family? And what happened to the Cubs for the rest of the 1932 season? A season, of course, made famous by one of the most famous home runs in baseball history, Babe Ruth's called shot during the Cubs-Yankees World Series. For that matter, what did Violet do with her life after all the excitement had died down and newspapers turned to other stories? And slowly the details started to emerge, but it took quite a bit of digging, as you might imagine. For example, the Chicago History Museum, they've got all sorts of early Cubs records, and they also had the records of the orphanage where Violet and her brother stayed for a few years. And I found the exact dates they did stay there, and also details about Violet's father and her brother's father, and about his lack of child support, a little bit about his, little interest in his children. In fact, one of Violet's brothers told the administrator there at the orphanage that Ulrichs had been the only home he had ever known, and did not even want to go back and live with his father. Newspaper articles provided both day-by-day coverage and interviews with Billy, Violet, and other people, such as comments by the baseball players who came across Billy in his hotel room after he had been shot. A skilled Chicago researcher and genealogist helped to find many relevant court documents. She was very, very helpful. Wow, she was very helpful. Violet's father was physically abusive to his wife, and there was a long, drawn-out court battle, divorce battle, in which 8-year-old Violet had to testify. So you can imagine what that would do to a kid. Correspondence and conversation with both Jurgis and Popovich family members helped me out too. They helped fill out numerous blanks. And I also went through every single Chicago newspaper page by page on microfilm. Newspapers.com didn't really have all the Chicago papers I wanted. I did have the Chicago Tribune online through my library, but all the rest of them, I got them, and I spent years on this, just going through every Chicago newspaper page by page. And today I want to talk about the shooting of Billy by his former girlfriend, her court hearing, and a few more details about Violet's life. Then I'm going to go back and touch upon her early life, her rather unhappy years. I'll also discuss the 1932 Chicago Cubs, profile Billy's life, and sum everything up. I'm also going to include some family photographs of both Billy and Violet, but particularly of Violet. And as I said, some of these have never even before been published. Now, on July 1, 1932, the Chicago Cubs were in the middle of a tight pennant race in the National League, and a player who was contributing to their Cubs' success was 24-year-old shortstop Billy Jurgis. And just a few weeks before, the baseball newspaper, the Sporting News, wrote that his fielding has been a defensive masterpiece, impelling no less an authority than his manager, Rogers Hornsby, to declare that Bill is the best shortstop in the game. Well, 21-year-old Violet Popovich, whose stage name was Violet Valley, would put a stop to all this a few days later. Billy and other Cubs players were staying at the Hotel Carlos, still standing, just a couple of blocks north of Wrigley Field on Sheffield Avenue. At about 9:45 in the morning of July 6, Billy Jurgis was getting ready for his big Cubs game when Violet Popovich called him from her room 111 in the same building and said she wanted to see him. He told her to come on up, And about 10:15, she knocked on his door, room 509, and that's his room, was his room right over here, top floor, upper right. They had been going out for about a year, but he had recently called things off. She wanted to talk about their conversation. I'm sorry, she wanted to talk about their relationship. And as the conversation grew more heated, she asked him for a glass of water. Well, here we go. While he was getting it, she pulled a small caliber revolver from her purse. And the New York Times wrote that he quote, made a wild lunge for the gun. And in the ensuing struggle, 3 shots were fired. And here's where they went. One bullet struck him in the right side, bounced off a rib, and exited out of his right shoulder. In fact, if it hadn't hit him, it bounced off the rib, he almost certainly would have died. Another grazed the little finger of his left hand. One bullet hit Violet about in her wrist and went up about 6 inches on her left hand. But as luck would have it, the Cubs physician was nearby. Baseball players heard the shots, got the Cubs physician, and both of them were treated at a local hospital. Now, these photographs, by the way, are all from my personal collection that I managed to collect over about the last 10 years. This one is not in my book. I think it's rather tacky, this tacky photograph right over here, but I'm showing it here. But anyway, the Chicago newspapers naturally pounced on this story. And as they say nowadays, it went viral. It was also somewhat sensational. Violet was called the dark-haired former chorus girl, the pretty gun-toter, the 21-year-old comely brunette, and the raven-tressed beauty. Photographers, as you can see here, barged into her hospital room to take pictures. Violet dislikes camera was a caption for this photograph, and it noted that her favorite target, that's the newspaper's words, Billy Jurgis, was in another hotel room. And note her bandaged left arm here, by the way, too. She stayed in the Illinois Masonic Hospital for just a couple of days, and here she is leaving for the Bridewell Hospital right next to the Cook County Jail. And she was booked on a charge of assault with intent to kill, and note the bandage that is still there on her left arm. Now, in the meantime, the police searched her hotel room, and they found these 2 photographs were in her hotel room. They also found a note addressed to her brother, in which she said, quote, "To me, life without Billy isn't worth living, but why should I leave this earth alone? And I'm going to take Billy with me." And she later said the note was a result of, quote, too much gin, and that she only wanted to kill herself to make Billy sorry for breaking up with her. And she said in an interview that when Billy was out of the room getting her a glass of water, quote, "I pulled out my revolver intending to kill myself. Bill saw me and grabbed the gun. We fought for it. We really fought for it. The gun kept exploding, but I certainly didn't want to hurt him." End quote. Now, Violet made the newspapers almost daily, particularly on July 15th, the day of her arraignment in Chicago's courtroom. And the Chicago American said that when she entered the courtroom with her attorneys, quote, "The crowd gasped at her radiant beauty." The Daily Illustrated Times wrote that she was a, quote, "symphony of red and white with her red earrings, red shoes, and red striped trimmings on her white crepe sports dress, exactly matching the shade of her lipstick." This is my favorite photograph, by the way. This is the only contemporary photo I've ever seen that has her standing like this, a whole full body shot. And as to my knowledge, has never, ever before been published. An old retired newspaper reporter came across it in his files. He came with the original negative was one of those old-fashioned, manila negative envelopes, all correctly labeled. I had to get the photograph myself. All he had was the negative with the people's names labeled on the negative folder, and I recognized them right away. And this was the photo that I got from the actual negative. So it's a real prized item, as you might guess. And of course, you can still see her with her bandage on right over there. The judge, John Sbarbaro, was not only attorney, but he was a judge, but he was also the ultimate political fixer. He ran a mortuary that was favored by Chicago's mobsters, who used its garage as a drop-off place for bootleg liquor. In fact, one time the garage was bombed, and of course it was bombed because of the mobsters and the booze. And all these reporters, I read it in the Chicago paper, started rolling their eyes when he started when somebody asked who bombed his garage, he started saying things like, well, you know, I've given out some pretty hefty sentences lately. I bet some of them did it. No, it was the mob who did it, the gangsters who did it. But he was also a Cubs fan, and he, like Billy and like the Cubs, just wanted all of this to just go away. Quietly go away. In fact, Judge Sbarbaro asked Billy beforehand, hey, Billy, what do you want me to do here? And he said, I don't want to press charges. I want to forget it. Let's just forget the whole thing. And the judge dismissed the case. And here they are in the courtroom here. And there's Violet with her two attorneys with that coquettish look on her face. There's Billy holding a handkerchief up to his face, not because he has a runny nose, but because he was hiding his face from the photographers. There were lots of photographers there. The whole courtroom was jammed. This is my second favorite photograph. I have one of the original wire photos, and that is it right there. And in my book, I discuss the whole courtroom hearing and what went on. Violet was a showgirl. Her showgirl friends were here, buried in the courtroom here. Her mother was here, and quite a few other people. This was July 15th. On July 22nd, Billy felt well enough to take the field in a game against the Pittsburgh Pirates. He played third base instead of shortstop, as he would have less stretching to do, obviously. The Cubs lost 3-1, but as one newspaper reported, Billy Jurgis, the celebrated revolver target, bowed himself back into his profession by socking a single to center. Okay, and it gets curiouser and curiouser here. Although Billy refused to sign a complaint against Violet, she decided to capitalize on her newfound fame by signing a contract to perform under her stage name in a show called The Bear Cub Follies, and not B-E-A-R, mind you. Billing herself as you can see here, no, it's not here. There it is, yeah, at the upper top of the ad here, the girl who shot for love. And the State Congress Theater was a burlesque club on South State Street in a real scruffy area known for its burlesque houses, its rundown rooming houses, hotels, rather seedy and dingy saloons and pool halls. And interestingly enough, on the same day, newspapers reported Billy's return to the ball field. Violet returned to the stage, and management did its part, by the way, by booking some, quote, Bear Cub girls, that's spelled B-A-R-E, as your opening act. And here's an ad for her act right over here. I was fortunate enough. In fact, throughout this whole project, said, well, I want to find a review of her show. You know, what went on in a burlesque show? Were the girls really bare? And they were, by the way. And I found a detailed review in the Chicago Daily News. And I liked the review so much because it told exactly how the whole thing went from the Bear Cub girls to everything. I reprinted the whole thing in my book. And it was written by Lloyd Lewis, who was a very well-respected Chicago Daily News editor. He was kind of a big man in the town too. He hobnobbed with historian Carl Sandburg, with author Sinclair Lewis, who wrote The Jungle, and Babbitt, some other books. Politician Adlai Stevenson was a friend of his, and he lived in a house designed by his pal Frank Lloyd Wright, which is now a state historical landmark outside of Chicago. Now, Violet's nephew told me that her singing career really didn't take off. In fact, the show closed after only a couple of weeks, but that her lack of success probably stemmed from her lack of talent. As her nephew told me, quote, she liked to sing, he told me. That is, she tried to sing. And Violet had other problems too. She was soon back in the news and back in Judge Sbarbaro's courtroom after her bail bondsman, a part-time real estate agent, full-time hustler, full-time con man, stole her Billy Jurgis love letters, saying he wanted to publish them under the title Love Letters of a Shortstop and sell them in ballparks around the country. And the correspondence also included love letters from Kai Kyler, who she also went out with before she found out that he was married, and then she dropped him. The letters were, as I said, love letters, and they were purportedly pretty steamy. I'd love to have seen these, but I don't know where they are. But anyway, the real reason the bail bondsman stole them was not to publish them, but to blackmail both Billy and Kai Kyler. And newspapers covered this for days, with the judge even saying publicly that, quote, the publication of letters that would hurt Jurgis or the Cubs must be prevented. And this was accomplished. The police came and got the guy, and he finally gave up the letters, and Violet eventually got them back. But her problems weren't over. She next tried to relaunch her singing career, getting a job as a singer of love songs in the Kitty Davis Cocktail Lounge in Chicago. She also began seeing a man named Fred Williams, shown here, who worked in the office of his father's hardware store, or hardware factory, I should say. But alas, she was again back in the news in 1937. On March 11th, Fred drove to the Kitty Davis Club to pick her up, but he got upset because he had to wait for her to finish a song and to change her clothes. They got into an argument in the car, and as the Chicago Times reported, they went, quote, whizzing through stop signs at a furious pace. And as she later told a policeman, I insisted he let me out, and he told me he would. Well, he opened the door and he pushed me out. And by the way, newspapers covered this, but she went back to her maiden name, or her brain name, her birth name, Heindel, and newspapers never put two and two together with Violet Popovich being Violet Heindel. I found this purely by accident by just going through the newspapers page by page, and I recognized her birth name here. But anyway, Violet got a few bumps and bruises, scrapes, but the two apparently patched things up. For a few months later, they applied for a marriage license, though they never married. And by 1940, Violet and her mother had moved from Chicago and were living in Los Angeles. A few years ago, Violet's nephew, Mark Prescott, the son of her brother, Mark, learned of my research and contacted me. He offered family photographs and personal insights, and with some more research, additional details emerged about the sad, strange saga of Violet Popovich. And these details also provide insights into just what may have led to her decision to confront Billy Jurgis in his hotel room on July 6, 1932, and pull a gun out of her purse. Anyway, this is Violet's father here, Mirko Popovich, who was an Austrian immigrant and he arrived in Ellis Island in 1907. An electrician by trade, he moved to Chicago, and in 1910 he married Margaret Heindel, also from Austria, and they had 4 children, of which Violet was the oldest, born in 1911. The marriage was not a happy one, and later life, all Violet wanted to do was have a nice, happy life and have a nice young man as a husband. And part of it was because of her parents, her father. When Violet was only 10 days old, her father began beating his wife, giving her black and blue eyes. And the couple got divorced in 1920 on the grounds of extreme and repeated cruelty. And in fact, 8-year-old Violet had to take the stand during the divorce and testify. Child support was slow in coming, despite Violet Popovich's Michael Popovich's steady income, and for a few years, Margaret and her brothers were forced to stay in the Ulick Children's Home run by the Lutheran Church. Violet very much disliked the orphanage, and in 1926, shortly before her 15th birthday, she told the administrator she was 18 years old and she wanted to leave. Apparently, no one verified her true age. I got all this from the orphanage records, and she went back home to be with her mother. And 4 months later, she probably regretted that decision because she ran away from home after her mother punished her for staying out late. The police were called to get her, and Violet consequently made her first appearance in the Chicago Daily Tribune newspaper. Violet said in interviews that she was married when she was 18, but that it was a very short marriage. She said, "I was unhappily married at 18, one of those puppy love affairs with a schoolboy. I never lived with him, and we were divorced 6 months later." Right after her divorce, she enrolled in a dancing school, and in the early 1930s, she joined the chorus of a Chicago production of Vanities, an annual musical produced by New Yorker Earl Carroll, who by that time was famous for his elaborate shows and scantily clad showgirls. The Souvenir pamphlet shown here notes that the show was quote, America's greatest review, and quote, through these portals pass the most beautiful girls in the world. In the summer of 1931, she met Billy Jurgis at a party. As she said in an interview, quote, "Bill is a boy and 100,000 for me. I met him at a party, and if it wasn't love at first sight, it was just about second." So they went out for quite a while, and but this was in 1931, and by 1932, just a year later, they had their dramatic meeting at the Hotel Carlos. She joined the burlesque show, went out with Fred Williams, and soon moved to Los Angeles. We'll continue with Violet, but let's get back to Billy and the Cubs for a while. And that's the Cubs infield right there. Woody English, who played both shortstop and third base. Billy Herman, the future Hall of Famer, in second base. Charlie Grimm, the captain, at first base. Stan Hack was a great third baseman. And Billy Jurgis, whose principal position was shortstop. Billy rejoined the team on July 22nd. And after their loss to Pittsburgh that day, they found themselves 3.5 games behind the league-leading Pirates. Excuse me. Now, at this time, everyone was under a great deal of stress because they weren't in first place anymore. They had all these problems with Billy being shot. And on top of that, there were all these whispered comments within the Cubs organization, which centered on the obvious animosity between Cub president William Veeck Sr., the father of Veeck as in Wreck, Bill Veeck, and the manager, Rogers Hornsby. Veeck believed that the team was easily good enough to win the National League pennant, and he was really getting sick and tired of Rogers Hornsby complaining about how lousy the team was and all their alleged shortcomings. And the players, too, had little use for Hornsby. Billy Herman said, quote, "He was one of the greatest hitters that ever lived, maybe the greatest, but he never talked hitting with us. He just expected you to go out there and do it." And things continued to get worse. A loss to the Brooklyn Dodgers on August 2nd put the Cubs 5 games behind the first place Pirates. That evening, Veeck fired Hornsby and appointed as manager the popular first baseman and team captain, Charlie Grimm. Now, Grimm lived up to his nickname, Jolly Charlie, and the team flourished under his easygoing, even-tempered leadership style. Said Billy Herman, "He just let everybody go their own way. No rules, no curfews. He ran the game on the field, of course, but away from that, he was just a happy-go-lucky guy." Now, Cubs president William Veeck was concerned about Billy's recovery. Right after he got shot, he was concerned about Billy's recovery, and he thought about getting somebody else to help out. And also, there was also the loss of player manager, of course, Rogers Hornsby. So, there's another reason why, Veeck needed some help in the infield. So Veeck brought in infielder Mark Koenig to help out his shortstop, and he used to play with the Yankees. He proved to be an excellent choice, as he definitely helped the Cubs clinch the National League pennant on September 20th. But all in all, it was a tough season for the Cubs. It was just, quote, "one thing after another," wrote the Chicago Daily Tribune, including the well-publicized dismissal of manager Rogers Hornsby, the shooting of Billy Jurgis, and as I said, some unfounded charges by the Chicago Daily News on horse race gambling by the players. But throughout it all, though, the Cubs managed to prevail largely due to the hitting and fielding of Mark Koenig, who batted .353 during the 33 games he played for the Cubs from August 14th to the end of the season on September 25. Now, each team would get a share of the World Series bonus money, and the players got to vote on how much each player got. It had to be unanimous, and the two Cub players, Billy Jurgis and Billy Herman, voted not to give Mark Koenig a full share, as he played in just the last part of the season, 33 games. Instead, they voted him only a half share of the money. Now, the New York Yankees, Koenig's former team, and Chicago's World Series opponents didn't see it that way. And when the newspapers announced the breakdown of the World Series money, the Yankees and Babe Ruth in particular, especially blasted the Cubs as cheapskates and penny pinchers. Sure, I'm on him, Ruth admitted scornfully in an interview. I hope we beat him 4 straight. They gave Koenig a sour deal in his player cut. They're chiselers, and I tell them so. And as famed Washington Post sports writer Shirley Povich wrote, quote, "The Cubs' stinginess fired the Yankees to new heights. The Cubs were down 2-0 in the World Series when Game 3 was played in Chicago. Insults have been flying back and forth, and the Cubs fans were yelling encouragement of the Yankees and abuse at the, encouragement of the Cubs and abuse at the Yankees. In the 5th inning, with the score tied 4-4, Ruth was at the plate facing pitcher Charlie Root with the count at 2 balls and 2 strikes. And Babe Ruth, as you probably all know, raised 2 fingers of his right hand. Did he signal that that was only 2 strikes? Did he gesture contemptuously to the Cubs in the third base dugout? Did he gesture to the pitcher Charlie Root? Or did he point to center field as if to signal that he was going to hit a home run? That is, did he call his shot? Now, what persons saw depended upon where they were sitting and the angle of the view. And even the home movies taken at that time really failed to conclusively say one way or the other, according to Robert Kramer in his biography of Babe Ruth. In any case, Babe Ruth, as you all know, did hit that home run, and Lou Gehrig followed with a home run of his own. And the Cubs lost that game 7-5, and they lost the following game in Chicago too. And the thoroughly demoralized Cubs lost the whole shebang, lost the whole World Series, 4-0, just as Babe Ruth had hoped. The Cubs did not even win one single game. Now, of course, whether Babe Ruth called his shot has been debated ever since October 1, 1932. And I go into this in some detail in my book. And by the way, opinions about whether he did or did not point to center field, I find this rather interesting. I did not know this before I started doing this research. They do not fall along partisan lines at all. As I found Cubs who emphatically maintain that he actually did point to center field. And I found Yankees, including Babe Ruth, who just as emphatically say he did not. They recognized early on it was a good story and they weren't going to spill the beans. Reporters picked up on it after Joe Williams of the New York World Telegram said that Ruth calls his shot in an article on the game. And by the way, just an aside, Kennesaw Mountain Landis was at that game, as was his son, just a boy at that time. And that son's own child was a student friend of mine at the University of Mary Washington. His name was Tim Landis. And he would talk about this. And he was just absolutely, my father was there. My father and my uncle said he pointed to center field. And don't tell me, Jack, that he didn't. I know my father said he did. And so we had quite the interesting discussion about all this.
You also had John Paul Stevens.
Oh, yes. Yeah, exactly.
He was there too. And I think there was, I don't know if you want to comment on this, but there was video that has surfaced in the last 10 years or so, that Fox broadcast that was also kind of inconclusive.
Mm-hmm.
So good. It was probably Ruth just being Ruth. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's right. Yes, in fact, I mentioned that in my book. Now, according to the hard-nosed Charlie Root, and Charlie Root was one badass, my gosh. one time some players on another team did something that he didn't like, and so he called the captain over and said, okay, whatever his name was, tell your guys they're going down one after another. And so he just kept on knocking them down one after another. But anyway, he said that if Ruth had tried to shore him up by signaling where he was going to hit the baseball, quote, anybody who knows me knows that Ruth would have ended up on his ass. And Charlie Root, by the way, brooked no interference on this topic. He was offered a large sum of money to play himself in the movie The Babe Ruth Story, and he turned it down, saying, not if you're going to show him pointing. And by the way, during a family outing, everyone was playing wiffle ball in a family outing, including Charlie Jr.'s wife, who was at bat, and she made the mistake of pointing her wiffle ball bat to center field. Her father-in-law immediately nailed her on the neck with the wiffle ball, knocking her down to the ground. And the subject rankled him all his life. And right before his death, he told his daughter, I gave my life to baseball, he said, but I'll only be remembered for something that never happened. But as I say in my book, does it really matter? Whatever happened, only Babe Ruth and his extraordinary power and his charismatic presence could fill that ballpark and could have transformed a few minutes of baseball into American legend. And as Charlie Grimm said, and by the way, right after the shot, Charlie Grimm said he called it, but later on in his biography, he said that he didn't call it. But anyway, as Charlie Grimm said, soon after the ball game, a great guy hit that homer, the greatest slugger of all time. After Violet shot Billy, he remarked that, quote, I guess I'll remain a bachelor all my life. He soon changed his mind, however, and on June 28, 1933, in Reading, Pennsylvania, he married Mary Hoyt of nearby Birdsboro. One sports writer felt that she must have provided him with, quote, inspiration, as on that day he celebrated his wedding with 6 hits during the doubleheader, including a home run in a Cubs-Phillies game. The Cubs won both games. He could not, of course, have topped off his wedding in any greater fashion. I also discuss the rest of Billy's career in my book, including his rather disastrous 1959 and 1960 seasons with the Boston Red Sox as manager. And when you become a manager, Billy later told an interviewer, you have to have a team that is coming up. All the players on my Red Sox team were on their way down, and there was simply not much I could do there. One of those players was the mighty left fielder Ted Williams, who in fact retired in 1960 and couldn't help Billy much. He and Jurgis got along very well, though, for they were both hardworking and they hustled. But in the late 1950s, hustling reportedly was not a part of the Red Sox vocabulary. And this was in all the Boston newspapers that I also went through page by page. Hustling was not a part of the Red Sox vocabulary, and a decided air of complacency had surrounded the team. I came across a Sports Illustrated article that said that too. And this club needs shaking up, an anonymous ball player wrote to Boston's Christian Science Monitor. And that player is rumored to be right fielder Jackie Jensen, no small hustler himself, who in 1959 led the American League with 112 runs batted in, and in 1960 would announce his own retirement. As Billy understated in the spring of 1960, quote, I am quite concerned about the outfield. Now the club did need shaking up, and Jurgis did his best, but he was let go in June 1960 with a disappointing major league managerial record of only 59 wins and 63 losses, a winning percentage of .484. He finished his career as a very, very well-respected baseball scout and instructor. He quit the baseball life in the early 1980s to take care of his ailing wife, Mary, who died in 1984. Several years, Billy remarried, and as he put it, he and his wife, Phyllis, quote, enjoyed the good life, unquote, in Largo, Florida. So there was a park near his house. They'd play horseshoe, they'd dance, they'd play pinochle and other card games. They'd travel together. They'd visit with other ball players who lived in the area. And they'd get together with former teammates at baseball functions. And although Billy was not a powerful hitter, he compensated for that with his really solid defensive skills. In fact, during his 17 years in the major leagues, from 1931 to 1947. Excuse me, 1947. He led the National League shortstops in fielding percentages 4 times in 1932, 35, 37, and 39, and once in double plays turn too in 1935. And he batted .258 in 1,816 games and collected 1,613 hits. And he said, Cubs, Giants, good year or a bad year, I've never failed to do my best to play out to the limit. Baseball has done well by me. I have done all I could for baseball. Billy was diagnosed with cancer in 1991. He entered the hospital in early 1997 and died a few weeks later on March 3rd at the age of 88. I interviewed both Billy's grandson and his daughter quite extensively. In fact, his grandson and I still stay in touch. He loved my book, by the way. He just absolutely loved it. And I asked his daughter if she knew that Violet Popovich had shot her father in 1932, and she said she was familiar with the incident, but quote, when she was growing up, quote, it was never mentioned in our house, never, with an emphasis on that last never. Well, as I said, Violet and her mother moved to LA. She always wanted to be a professional singer. She had these photographs taken of herself to promote her singing career. She got few chances for launching her West Coast singing career, though. I love these photographs, especially with that cape and those shorts there. These are all in my book. No, the bottom one's not in the book, but the top 2 are. Now, Violet was a city person, and her 1947 marriage to boxer Charlie Retzlaff was probably doomed from the start. He was known as the Duluth Dynamiter from Minnesota. He was regarded as a very good fighter until a young boxer named Joe Louis knocked him out of the first round in 1937. I think it was 1937. Yeah. I go into more about Charlie Retzlaff and Violet's other relationships in my book. John Wayne tried to pick her up at a nightclub one time. Violet's 2 nephews share with me other stories about their aunt. In fact, one of them even overheard his mother talking to Violet about the shooting. And here's Violet with her nephew, Mark Prescott, and Violet with her mother, Margaret Heindel Popovich. And again, she led a very happy life. She worked at a film studio in the color department. As you can see here, she was very happy. By the way, Violet was not in on this shooting alone, and purportedly a mysterious girlfriend, to quote Violet's to quote Chicago's newspapers, accompanied her to Billy's door that faithful day. And this is probably her stepsister, stage actress Betty Subject. Betty, though, had her own share of problems. Newspaper delighted reporting about her 4 marriages and the rather seamy details of her personal life. She spent her final years in a nursing home. What she lacked in money, she made up for with cheerful spirits. She delighted in telling the staff their tales about her showgirl past. She died on February 25th, 2000, was buried in Los Angeles' Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills. She was 88 at the time, just the same age as Billy. I discussed in my book how the Hotel Carlos had fallen on hard times too. You can see the air conditioners here, the dingy trimming up the upper left, these kind of grimy columns down over here. It was not in very, very good shape after a while. It was practically new when the Cubs stayed there in the 1930s. A real estate company purchased it and renamed it, remodeled it, and renamed it as 3834 North Sheffield. It's for upscale professionals. This homepage calls it a once hip apartment hotel for Cubs. Now it's like 1-bedroom condos for professionals. I had a friend of mine take these pictures just last summer, and there's Billy's room still on the top floor there. Just one more thing. In 1949, 19-year-old Chicagoan Ruth Ann Steinhagen, who had to quote the New York Times, a twisted fascination with former Cub, and then Philadelphia affiliate Eddie Wakeus shot him in his room at Chicago's Edgewater Beach Hotel. Ironically, Wakeus and Jurgis had played together for 2 years, and Wakeus had hit a double in Billy's last game. Now, Arthur Bernard Mallam had never mentioned where he got his source material, but it seems likely that one or both of these shootings inspired him to include a passage in his novel, 1952 novel, The Natural, in which a woman shoots ball player Roy Hobbs. And of course, The Natural and that scene continued to live on today, thanks to the movie starring Robert Redford as Hobbs. Just one more thing, just a few more minutes here, about 2 or 3 more minutes. I want to touch about one more moment in the Cubs' 1932 season. One of those irritating experiences, I alluded to this before, was the alleged gambling that was a front page story of the Chicago Daily News. And few sources talk about this. And after Rogers Hornsby was fired on August 2nd, 1932, the Cubs players were both relieved, and they were both relieved that he was gone, but they were also worried because he owed them money. It turned out that Hornsby often bet on the ponies, and to cover his gambling debts, he borrowed thousands of dollars from the Woody English, coach Charlie O'Leary, and the pitchers Guy Bush, Pat Malone, and Bob Smith. But the Chicago Daily News had an entirely different take on it. In a front page story on August 11th, they reported on a sweeping inquiry into the Cubs players' horse race gambling. And President Veeck was just livid, and he called the story one of the most outrageous incidents in Chicago Cubs history, and a cheap, cowardly attack. It all had to be checked out somehow, and the man for the job was, of course, Kennesaw Mountain Landis. The men all testified before him in a special hearing on August 13th, which was well publicized in newspapers. The married Guy Bush was particularly outraged because the newspapers all reported that he was seen with 2 blonde women who reportedly worked for a bookmaker. And Bush told Judge Landis, "I think that story is terrible, Judge." Bush protested, "I don't give a damn what anybody says. It is awful." Well, after Landis listened to the evidence, he agreed with them. Bush and his teammates were cleared of all charges. His testimony showed that only Hornsby had gathered on the horse races. He had borrowed some $11,000 from the men. He's testified rather incredulously that he used it only to pay off the mortgage on his home and interest on his home. And I don't think anybody believed that. A total of $6,000 had been paid back, and Hornsby had to sign in a note agreement with President Veeck as to how all the other money would be paid. And as the Tribune was right, it was just one thing after another. Now let me end real quickly on something of a light note that'll kind of make you laugh, I hope. I've gotten to know Chicago Cubs historian Ed Hartig real well because we've never met, but we've emailed many times. And a quote from him in this book several times, and also in my earlier Cubs book. And we both agreed that except for the decision to pull a gun out of her purse, Violet seemed like a pretty nice person. All she wanted was a solid, stable relationship and some security. Though, as Ed told me, he said, "Hey, Jack, if she hadn't latched on to Billy, she would have latched on to some other ball player." But she really just wanted some security, and her own home life was brutal, and her father and her parents certainly couldn't provide that. On the other hand, of course, there's a little business with a gun in her purse. But all in all, she was a rather sad character in Cubs history. I've enjoyed all this research a great deal. I was telling Ed in an email a few years ago, that's like, "Ed, Violet's like a member of my family." And he said, "Wait a minute, Jack, maybe it's time for you to take a break from this for a little while. Turn your computer off, leave the microfilm, go for a walk, take a drive, do something else for a while." And I suppose Ed had a point. But nevertheless, Violet will probably be with me for quite a bit longer. In fact, just a few months after Ed gave me this good advice, I decided to make Violet a part of my Christmas card with me and my 2 kids, my son and my daughter. So here we are. There's Violet on my Christmas card one year. And note all the cast, which my sister is a graphic designer and she created this for me. And the bandage says, "Violet, I hope you feel better soon. Go Cubs, Jack." Okay. Thanks very much, everybody.
Jack, thank you very much. That was informative and entertaining, and you answered my question about the natural right at the end.
Oh,
I figured
good.
I figured that was where the scene came from in that movie and the passages in that book.
Yeah, great.
How many years did you spend doing the research for this book?
Let's see, it came out this year, and I bet I started about 8 years ago, at least. I started. Part of it, I was working on that other Cubs book. I do it off and on, but really intensely, I'd say at least 5 years. Because I had to go through all that news, all that. I really wanted to use only primary sources. So I went through all the Chicago papers. Again, pretty much page by page. And I was working full time, so I could only do this on weekends when the library was closed. We had a microfilm reader printers. And, there's newspapers.com and some online sources, but then the newspapers.com didn't have all the Chicago papers for all these years. I remember, no, it did not have the Chicago Daily News. I knew the Chicago Daily News, an afternoon paper, and that had some interviews with players and interviews with other people that I found out were buried in there, including that really neat review of Violet's show that I just couldn't find in any other thing, in any other paper. And I was working more than full time. So yeah, eight years sounds like a lot of time, but no, it's just because I couldn't do it full time. I had two children. I spent time with them. They're growing up, but I still want to spend time with them. I was working full time, and and so I could only do this, part time. So
Yeah.
It was an awful lot of fun. It was a great deal of fun, and knowing that Violet's nephew, we still stay in touch, and Ed Hartig, the Cubs historian, and Billy Jurgis's grandson. I wondered at the time what he would think of the books. I kept telling him, his name's Bill too. I said, "Bill, it's not a true biography, but he hadn't really read it before, and no way did I want him to read it before, but he liked it, and even though, his grandson was having a thing with Violet and everything, and other women too, but he really enjoyed it. In fact, he said he was going to buy copies. I want to put it on the New York Times bestseller list." So that kind of made me feel good, that he liked it.
Excellent.
Did Violet ever make any public comments after the hearing about her version of what happened, or her, how it affected her life, or why she did it? Or
yeah, she did say right after it says, quote, something like, "I owe it to my self-respect to put all this behind me and to move on." And of course, before it, she just kept on saying that she really intended to kill herself just to make Bill sorry for dropping her. But that wasn't true. In fact, I didn't get into this, but I told you that Violet's nephew, in fact, my friend Mark Prescott, overheard Violet talking about this with her sister-in-law, Mark's mother, and she admitted that she really did go into that hotel room with the intent to kill him. Her exact words were, "I was very angry and I wanted to kill him." So, and of course that letter, when she said, "I want to take Billy with me," said she was going to kill him. But publicly, right up to the arraignment, she said, "It was an accident and we were struggling for the gun. It went off. I only wanted to kill myself." But right after the hearing, she said, "I owe it to my self-respect to go on with my life. If I only see Bill again, it will only be in passing." Now, later on in a couple of Cubs, there's a biography of Rogers Hornsby, and in a footnote, it said one time Guy Bush and Billy and a couple other people were in a Chicago bowling alley a couple years later, and they saw Violet bowling at another lane, and Guy Bush said, "We got out of there like a bullet." We didn't want anything to do with her.
Hey, did you do any genealogy? Is she related to Greg Popovich?
I don't know. I did do some genealogy, but I didn't get down that far. This Cubs person I employed in Chicago to do a lot of the courtroom stuff, the court stuff with the divorce. I cover that on my book, and she got stuff I'm a good reference librarian, but this stuff in the circuit court. And she told me that the people there are really mean, you know, but she knew one person who really knew her and he helped her a great deal. But circuit court records were extremely difficult to find. But she pulled out all the stops, and the money I paid her was well worth it. And she didn't charge all that much. And she did a bunch of genealogy with the half sister, the subject family, but she didn't get down to the Popovich's relatives. But I have ancestry.com, so I should look into that. You know, yeah.
Well, ironically, there was a Cubs infielder in the '60s named Paul Popovich.
Paul Popovich, I know that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I should have looked into that. You know, I didn't even think of that. You know, and I knew that too.
Since the animosity developed, perhaps apparently between the Yankees and Cubs over the failure to give Mark Koenig a full share, and you mentioned that Bill Jurgis was one of the two players who voted against the full share. Did he ever explain that or his reasoning?
He did. There was a quote from him in that book Wrigleyville, I think it was, a collection of oral interviews, and he says something like, he did win the pennant for us, but he didn't play in that many games. And that was all their reason. He only played in 33 games. In fact, Guy Bush said he did win the pennant for us. And Charlie Grimm in his autobiography said Koenig really won the pennant for us. But Bill Jurgis kept saying, well, he didn't play in that many games. Guy Bush later was interviewed later on. He said if he had to do it all over again, he would have pushed for him to win the full share.
And was the other player, I tried to comprehend that, but was it Stan Hack or who was the other player?
Oh, Billy Herman was the other player.
Billy Herman was
the other player, yeah. Well, everybody else wanted him to get a full share, but it had to be unanimous. And I said later on, Guy Bush wished he could have given a full share. Mark Koenig really was bitter about it. In that same book Wrigleyville, he's quoted as saying, "I never fit in with the Cubs. They only voted me a damn half share of the World Series money." So he was quite angry about it all. And he was traded a couple years later. I can't remember to what team.
Jack, do you have a copy of your book you can hold up and show everyone?
Yeah, I do here.
So people know what to buy when they go online to get it?
Yeah, I hope so. Here it is right here. It's
all right.
Backwards. In fact, let me see. It's right over here too. There it is, right there.
There it is.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. And if anybody buys it and would like, I even had book plates made with this cover, and so I can always just email me, just jbales@umw.edu here, and there it is. I'll be glad to send you a signed book plate.
Oh, that'd be great.
It really is a good story, you guys. I mean, it really is a neat story. It got a great review in the Chicago Daily. What was it called now? Chicago. I can't remember. Not the Daily. Suburban Chicago Times, was it? Arlington newspaper. I'm having a senior moment. I can't think of the newspaper. And my hometown newspaper even paid me the ultimate comment and said a Hemingway style of telling a story or something like that.
Wow.
I thought that was pretty cool.
Daily Herald.
Daily Herald, that was it. Thank you.
And,
the Daily Herald. Yeah.
And Herman was traded to the Cubs.
Yeah.
Actually, after in the midseason of 41, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
Got it.
So.
Any other questions for Jack?
This has been a great amount of fun, you guys. Thank you so much for having me. I loved it. You made my day. Made my week.
Well, thanks for joining us.
I wish I could. Sometime I'd love to come in person to your meeting sometime.
Well, we haven't had one in quite a while.
I know. Yeah.
We're all over the place. We are the people in the Bud Metheny chapter. We go up north to Richmond, so we've got a wide geography. So actually this Zoom thing has actually probably been one of the better things that's happened to our chapter, because we can get together on the via Zoom. It's a lot easier than trying to consolidate everybody in one geographical area.
Well, I'd love to kind of participate. If that'd be okay to kind of join in on things.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If you can put me down as a member or something
Just
like that.
go onto your SABR account and check the Bud Metheny chapter, and you'll get everything.
Okay, good. I'll do that.
Absolutely.
Then. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
All right.
Much. Hey, thanks you guys again.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Jack.
There's no more
Thank you
questions.
very
Everybody have a good evening.
Yes, everybody have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, everybody. Have a good one.
Yes.
Bye.